Hello, everyone. Hello to current and future leaders. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of The Big Idea. Today, we are going to be talking about mental health awareness. It's been very exciting in the past year plus because I've heard so many officials, including ASEAN officials, ASEAN ambassadors, US officials, everyone understands that a piece of the post pandemic environment is that people need to think about not only their bodies, not only their physical health, but their mental health as well. And I have a guest today who is focused on mental health. I feel like we're already friends. Yi Feng, please join the program.
Hello, Jason.
Good to see you. And
Good to
Ifang
see you
and
too.
I were talking before the show about I love for guava juice. I don't know if you can see that, but I have a cup in hand and we're going to be drinking together.
Cheers.
Cheers! While we're talking about mental health, which is such an important topic, and I knew you would have a lot of interesting ideas to share with the audience and with me. So let's just start with the fact that in the United States, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and this month has a special theme. Please tell us, what is this theme and what does it mean to you?
Wow. So I was doing a bit of research before coming on today's show, right, Jason? And I saw that there were a few themes that were coming up, and two of them in particular was quite interesting, right? The first came from Mental Health America, which says back to mental health basics. The other
Mhm.
one came from the National Alliance for Mental Illnesses, right, in the United States, and they call it Together for Mental Health. I think when we put these two topics and these two together at this current juncture, it can't be any more important than that when we look at back to mental health basics. There are a lot of transitions that each one of us are going through as we come out of COVID 19 into this new normal, or as some say, never normal, right? What when we go back towards the basics, the things that help us through the difficult times, perhaps that is exactly what can help us through the difficult times that may come again. And one part of that is that also, if there's one thing that I think COVID 19 really taught us, is that we're never safe until most of us or everyone is safe. Right? And that's where we need to come together to be together for mental health. And I'm curious for you, Jason, how did you read that, right, when you hear these themes for this year?
Well, when I hear mental health basics, I think, what are the basics that can make an individual happy? Because we need to focus on that. And a lot of times it's just we have certain needs that exist every day, no matter whether it's in COVID reality or post-COVID reality. We need to make sure that we've had a good meal. So we need to think of our nutrition. We need to think about our loved ones. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a spouse. It can be family, but it can be close friends to have a community. We need a network in our life. And physical exercise is important too. So if you balance all those things, a good meal, getting some exercise, make sure you are giving and receiving from your network of loved ones, most of the time you're going to be okay. Not always. Mental health is more complex than that, but those are the basics. If you think about those three areas, you'll probably do okay. Is that fair to say?
I totally agree with you, Jason. As you looked at that, there's this when you were sharing, right, Jason. There's this idea that came to mind about the pyramid, and in my sector, we often talk a lot about the pyramid. This pyramid is what we call the pyramid of mental health, and all of us, you and I, we all have the mental health pyramid right within us. Sometimes, though, most of us will be at the health area. There are at times where we might go into the distress state. For example, if there's so much stress going on, and if that persists over a period of time, that may become a mental health problem. And if that persists even longer, right, that may even become a disorder and what we might call a mental illness in this regard, right, of this conversation. But exactly, I think when we talk about going back to basics, as you mentioned, Jason, back to the fundamentals. Eat well. Sometimes I joke, right? Eat well, sleep well, and if I can say poop well, and sometimes life is better in that
Hmm.
sense. If they're the
Hmm.
normal things that we are doing, we are able to do them. We can actually live a great life, right?
Well, absolutely. The body has certain needs, and the heart has certain needs, and the soul has certain needs, and you have to be thinking about all three. But you talked a little bit about the fact that when we're starting to have when we're starting to have personal issues,
Mm,
it can turn into a disorder, and
mm,
figuring out those lines can be a little complex. So I'd
mm.
like to give an example. I'd like to explore a topic that a lot of people struggle with, and it's called depression. So, could you define the term depression for the audience?
Sure. Yeah. And first, cheers to that. For before really, I think I first just really want to say a big thank you as well for having me on the show, Jason. Right. And when we talk
My
about
pleasure.
depression, I thought, yeah, it is it's such a big topic when we think about that. I really like this video by the World Health Organization. I think they talk about I have a black dog named depression. And when we talk about that, right, the author actually thought about how depression looks like a black dog to him. For each one of us, I think if we really want to look at depression as a mental disorder per se, so because sometimes in our daily vernacular, we might just say that, I'm depressed of sorts. We tend to use it quite casually. But if we are talking about it as a disorder, there are various things that we looked at. In the Diagnostical Statistical Manual 5, right, where mental health professionals, right, use, and a lot of psychiatrists in the United States and in Singapore, we use, and I would say in throughout most parts of Southeast Asia, if I dare to say a bit of that, we tend to look at it and there are five. It needs at least 5 out of 9 symptoms to qualify, with two of which being low moods, persistent low moods for 2 weeks or more, and the second one is the loss of interest in the things you like to do. It is can be a very scary
Wow,
thing when
that's
the
very
person,
good.
yeah, it can be
That's
so
a very
scary.
good way to think about it.
Yeah,
If you're sad, but usually, excuse me, usually
no.
watching a movie will relax you. But even if you watch the movie and it doesn't work, that's when something is really quite serious.
Mm. I tend to like this metaphor, and Jason, as we talk more, we might see that I'm using a lot more metaphors. I like this metaphor called insect cages because it helps us to remember what depression can look like. And insect cages is a sort of mnemonic for me to remember that because it can be so difficult, right? So the first one is the loss of interest, IN. Sad is sleep appetite, depressed moods, concentration, activity, and as well as guilt, and last but not least as well, I think energy level and suicidal thoughts. A lot of times, I think when we talk about mental disorder or depression in particular, one of the things that I think we have to be very much focused on and be a big concern on relating to depression is because if sometimes for some people when the disorder and the symptoms happen for a long period of time, that could lead them to feel very distressed. And in those moments, suppose if they decide to take some drastic actions to a very temporary problem, that may even lead to a loss of life, right? Due to
Mm.
suicide. And suicide in among the youths in the world, right, is the leading cause of death um, for youths between 10 to 29 years old. And that's something I think important for us as well to watch out for one another.
Now you've been passionate about helping people and mental health issues for many years. Tell our audience a little bit about your background. You are a social worker. Tell us how you got involved with social worker, why you wanted to move into this profession.
Yeah. Sometimes Jason, I joke that it's by accident that I come into social work. Kind of like some peers in the sector always say that you don't choose kind of the profession. The profession sometimes chooses us. And um, I like this idea of the wounded healer a lot in my profession. And this concept of the
Mm,
wounded healer, which came from Henry Nowen in his books really long time ago. And I felt that it really encapsulates what it means to be a social worker of sorts. Often the wounded healer is called to the profession or called to heal because they have been wounded before, or in the process of healing, they become wounded. For me, I think I got into the sector as well because of certain past, like personal experiences relating to having been wounded, relating to mental health issues. I had my own struggles, I think, growing up, and at the same time, I even I saw and supported some friends, right, who have been there been through their own mental health struggles. It was really tough. I even lost someone to suicide when in the course of supporting them. And these are things that I think it don't leaves you. And over a period of time, I thought maybe if if there's something that I keep coming back to, why not make it a career, right? Why not do something about it? And I'm so heartened, Jason. When I started into this thing, I start to meet a lot of people, right? I know that I'm not alone in this journey to want to do something relating to mental health. There's so many people who believe strongly in this cause, and thank you as well for this platform, because I can sense as well, because as we are talking more, for you to want to prioritize this topic for us to talk about in this month, that makes a difference.
If you, I'd like to hear your advice. Let's say that someone has a friend who is very sad, appears to be
Mm,
depressed. What's a good way to handle that conversation? What are some things that the individual should say or not say to that friend who is very sad?
mm, mm. That's a great question,
That's a tough
and
question.
Jason, it is a tough question, Jason, and I get that often, Jason, because you often say, right, I want to help my friend, um, but I don't know what's the right way to help. I like to challenge that to say maybe perhaps there's no right way to help. There's just your way of helping. There are some ways that work better than others, like when we go to training in my work as a social worker, I train youth across Singapore in institutes of higher learning in terms of peer support skills. There are some things, right, that tends to work a bit better. I like to call it a golf metaphor, right? And the golf metaphor in itself always has a swing, and with that swing itself, there must be a setup before the hit itself. And the setup is often what I
Hmm,
call, perhaps when we come across as saying that we care about the person, that can make a difference. Often, people do not
huge.
care about what we know until they know how much we care. And so,
Mhm.
if we can start with that and say, hey, I noticed something about you, I care about you, I'm concerned. Um, and the hit is what's going on, right? How are you? Are you okay? Like,
It's
and
beautiful
then you follow
advice, but
through.
it does it does remind me of a tip that I heard when sorry, I'm having a huge frog in my throat which I can't get rid of. Good thing I have this guava juice. I remember when I was training to work on a crisis helpline, and one of the pieces of advice was to say, be there for the person, but never say, I understand, because everyone's personal situation is different. So, a really good way to handle that conversation is just to say, I care about you. I want to hear what's going on for you, what's going on in your mind. Let's talk about it. I'm a good listener. Tell me what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and really just be there for the person.
I totally agree with you, Jason, and thank you for connecting that to your own experience, Raken. And actually, I really enjoy, I think, hearing from you to talk about it, because that reminds me often. Um, Sometimes we might go into the advice giving mode and say, hey, you should do this, and then get step out of it,
Hmm.
get out of it, and
Yeah.
that somehow, I mean, when I ask young persons, and today I really want to give thanks as well to all the young person who give me a chance to work with them, because they teach me and they share with me that this works, this doesn't work,
Hmm.
and many of them actually say that that's I know they are well intentioned, but hey, that really doesn't work, right? That makes me feel worse when supposed to someone says, hey, get out, step out of it. You can do this or sort. Sometimes that can become toxic positivity, and I think there's a healthy blend towards that. Is with mental health, I really feel that it's never just black or white. That there's the right way or wrong way. Perhaps as we try more and as we figure out more, we might find our way of connecting to our friends and supporting our friends.
Now, I'm really fascinated by this phrase you use, the wounded healer. How does one protect oneself? So one wants to help a friend or a family member, but you also want to protect yourself. You want to make sure that you don't take on all of the depression or the problems of the other person. How do you find that balance? What's a good technique to be there for someone while protecting yourself?
Whew, Jason, I've watched a lot of the episodes, and you always ask great questions that I struggle to answer, right? With this, and clearly I'm saying that to buy time as well because it's such a good question. And Jason, I want to be very frank, right? And that sometimes, and to our listeners as well, sometimes it's really tough. You can do the best you can, right, to take good self care, and you may still get burnt out. But it's important to take care of ourselves, no matter what. Is to remember that first, before we can take care of others, we have to take care of ourselves. In Singapore, most of us have to, all Singapore males, right, by the time we reach 18 years old, have to serve national service. And I can always remember my sergeant, my military sergeant telling me that, before you can lead others, Ifeng, you need to lead yourself and to take care of yourself first. And I thought that was a good reminder. It reminds me as well, when we take the plane, right? And now that we know we can go back to perhaps traveling a little bit, the stewardess or the steward will always say, right? When the mask comes down, please put it on yourself first before you put it on, a child or other people. And
What
the
a
same
great
concept.
metaphor. Yes.
It is, right? And
Hmm.
exactly that. We must and can take care of ourselves, and there's not just one way to take care, and there are various ways. I like to call it a menu of health, right? Where we, just like we go into a restaurant, we have our own preferences. There are various ways. I can always share about different ways of seeking help and helping ourselves, but really to go back, right, to think a little bit about the last time, right, when I was feeling, while struggling, what would be something that helps me to feel recharged? And earlier, I think, Jason, as you mentioned, about the ways of kind of like that we can look at that, right? Biologically, if you can look at eating healthily, right, exercising more, resting and sleeping well, it's not actually very cool to burn the midnight oil, although sometimes in Singapore, right, with education and all, it's important to rest psychologically, perhaps having journaling that might help, or having that space for ourselves amidst our busyness. And at the same time as well, to look a little bit at socially, connect with other persons, right? Connect with our friends, our family, right? Our partner. Yeah. So biopsychosocial, these are the three things that often in my sector we look a lot at with young persons. And in fact, it is something that I use for myself as well to check myself. Am I doing these three things? Am I covering this basis? Right, of my menu of health. Yeah. So that's a little bit. I hope that that was a bit help. That was a bit helpful for you
Great
and our listeners.
advice. And I would just add that if you are the person helping your friend, it's okay to say at some point to the friend, I think it's time for you to maybe see a professional, someone who's really experienced at helping people through a deep crisis. And if you are the person going through the crisis, it's okay to reach out to a psychotherapist or a social worker or someone who is skilled at talking through these issues. Now,
Hmm.
Yifeng, I do want to talk about your involvement with YSEALI. You were involved in a program in 2019. Tell us about that program.
Wow, thank you so much, Jason, for this chance as well to think back, right? And before coming on the show, I was just thinking back, how nice it was, right? Just turning back about 2 to 3 years ago. I've kind of lost track of time, but I was on this program called YSEALI Engage, and as the name suggests, right, it really wants to engage youth, but not just for any topic. It was one of the first. It was inaugural program, in fact, on public health, and I'm very honored to be a part of the inaugural batch where we looked into looking at tackling non-communicable diseases. The Sustainable Development Goal, right, for health looks at, I think, the ways that how can we reduce mortality due to non-communicable diseases. Jason, something about participating in this program is magical. I mean, as with most, I think, if not all, wisely programs, right? They often bring us to a different level of understanding. And let me just share one, right, that really struck me so much. I was in that room, right, about 40 to 50 people of delegates from across Southeast Asia, and it was on non-communicable diseases and mental health being a part of that agenda, right? They were focusing there and preparing the speakers and for tackling non-communicable diseases, for example, like smoking, right, substance abuse and all. But they realized that more than half of the applicants, more than half, were submitting applications due to their own mental health initiatives that they are leading in Southeast Asia. That really blew me away to know that, hey, I'm really
Mm.
not alone. My friends around Southeast Asia are really doing a lot, right? I met some friends in Vietnam who are working on creating peer support networks via a cafe, right? Just to have tea with another person, just like we're having guava juice and coffee over here, right? They have tea, and over a cup of tea, have a chat, have a talk over a tea. And that's very culturally sensitive and appropriate, I thought. So various ways, it got me really inspired. And that was only through this program for a week, right, in Bandung, where we really exchanged ideas and help one another sharpen our ideas. And how can we possibly collaborate across, even across nations?
There's a lot of movement going on in the mental health sector, professional sector throughout Southeast Asia, which is so exciting. There's still room to grow. And of course, many young leaders in this field are pushing for policy changes and different kinds of subsidies in research. And ASEAN is paying attention to those concerns. And of course, the US government is having dialogue and conversation with all kinds of Southeast Asian leaders to make the sector better and to learn from each other all the time. We could get into lots of details about that, but let's pause for a moment because I know that you have shared some photos of some of your programs. So I'm going to ask my assistant to bring up those photos. Let's take a look at what you brought today.
Let's see. All right, we got the first one.
All right,
All right.
conversations in the dark. What's going on here?
Yeah. So this was something that I did when I was an undergraduate, Jason. And
Uh huh.
when I was an undergraduate, some years back, I founded a group in the National University of Singapore where I studied, when I pursued my bachelor's in Southeast Asian studies. And when I was over there, was when I stepped into the school, I was like, hey, there actually aren't that many conversations going on surrounding mental health. And this was in about 2015. So I said, hey, how about let's have a bit of conversations? And at that point in time, Jason, I, I, I don't know if you remember, there was this advertisement by Coca-Cola about labels are for cans, not people. And in that advertisement itself, they talk a lot. They have basically had conversations in the dark, right? And where they talk about who they are, what they do, what they are passionate about in life, rather than look at one another. So it was pitch black, right? And they have just have conversations and connecting as humans. So I really wanted to bring that concept into the National University of Singapore. We blanked out the lights and really just try to make it pitch black. As you can see, some people are wearing masks, right? And but not on their mouth,
Yes.
but on their eyes, because I didn't have money to
Yes.
I didn't have money to buy blindfolds then. But so I got masks, right? And when they wear that, it really kind of try to put them into that zone that, hey, I'm really not focusing on the physical attributes of the person,
Mhm.
or but really just focusing on the timbre of their voice and connecting with them as humans to humans. Just like how the photo on the right was showing, right? Just being together in that space.
I love that. I have to try this myself sometime. That what an interesting experiment. I've seen this sometimes in the context of eh, attempting to experience what it's like to have a disability. So you experiment with being blind or deaf, but looking at this also just having everyone have a conversation and connect as humans with all the visual out of the way, just focusing on the words being said. That's fascinating. I love this. I love this. I want to do this. So together, maybe sometime I'll visit you in Singapore and we can
Let's do
put
that.
on something like this.
Let's
All
do
right.
that.
What's the next photo?
And this is the next one that,
Um, mhm.
following on from which I was like, hey, how can we push the dialogue a little bit? And Jason, like you say, right, right now in across Singapore, I mean, not across Singapore, across the world, in fact, right, there's been a lot of more movement in and investment into looking at mental health resources and all. And I wanted to talk about how can we have conversations a little bit differently. What if we could put out social distancing and make it clear to everyone? We talk a lot about stigma, And in mental health, we cannot run away from stigma, right? Stigma is a big part of the labels that people put onto people with mental health issues, the disorders, the diagnosis, and as a result of that, that kind of internalized stigma and how others look at them. So I thought, hey, how about this? Let's have a bit of a walk. Let's line up on one line, as just like the photo on the left, and then relating to some questions, right? I use it from some social distancing skills, right, relating to mental illnesses, and so they are stigma and they are stigma related skills. And I invited people take a step forward, right? If this resonates with you, now take a
Oh.
step
Hmm.
backwards if this is not right. And so ultimately, the more in front you are, right, or actually in fact, the more behind you are, it shows that you actually hold more stigma as compared to less stigma. And one thing, interestingly, Jason, that I found out I hope to share a bit with you was that it kind of shocked me a little bit when I did this experiment that sometimes maybe it's not just when people actually look around, right, at the end of the day, and when they see where they are standing, being confronted with the distance in which they're standing, that does something to the heart to know that, hey, maybe perhaps it's time that I check myself a little bit more, or I have a little bit more literacy or understanding in this topic.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. Let's look at the next photo that you brought.
Yeah. So this next
What's going
photo,
on here?
wow. So as you can see from the photo over here, right? There's looks at what does it stand out to you as you take a look at this, Jason?
I see that people are adding thoughts and the complexities of trees, all the parts of trees and the branches, the leaves, the fruit that's being grown and developed, the roots. And there's a lot of complexities in the metaphor of trees.
Exactly, Jason, and you hit it right on the spot, right? Trees are all around us and they have so much wisdom. And so this came from an innovation called in therapy called the tree of life. And so I working with a group of youths, about 12 different youths, invited them to just draw out their tree of life, the roots being what they are grounded in, what holds them to the ground and what keeps them, their values and all, right? The branches and all, there are different elements to each part of the tree, and they become, as they form their tree, they form kind of the identity of who they are as a person. And if you
Hmm.
remember, right, I mean, a lot of times growing up in the adolescent period, the identity could be one of the most difficult thing to kind of ground themselves in. And in fact, it's one of the key psychosocial development goal that they have. What was most beautiful and magical about this, Jason, was that when they put their trees together, just like what you see in this photo, when the youths put their trees together side by side and they took a step back and they're like, wow, actually, what we have here is a forest of life. I'm not alone.
A forest of life. That's great.
Yeah. So that was really the intention of me wanting to share a bit of this initiative. And I hope that the photos, why I picked those photos to share was also that
Mhm.
I hope that perhaps it could give us a bit of ideas on working with people. And I want to first, I think, come out to say very clearly, I don't have a monopoly of ideas. And in fact, I'm really wanting to learn more and more about the ideas that help us, right? That can do this
Mhm.
work. Mental health conversations are advancing, and we probably likely need to look at culturally appropriate resonant metaphors and ways of working, especially in Southeast Asia, an area that we call home, an area that is very close to our heart.
Hmm. Area is very close to home and the heart. That's great. All right, I know you have one more photo.
Yes, and I just wanted to just show one last photo on this because this photo, Jason, was kind of marked my academic awakening, right? In terms of my work in mental health. Before this, I was just really trying to learn more about mental health, and in this photo, what you see is friends, right, in Indonesia, and I spent about 6 months in Indonesia in courtesy of the Temasek Foundation, where they gave me a scholarship to go and pursue my a semester abroad. And when I was in over in Indonesia, and this was in Yogyakarta, right, where I spent a semester studying at the University of Gajah Mada. And here are my friends from the Center for Indigenous and Cultural Psychology, together with besides academics and students, there's also mental health policymakers, as well as mental health professionals on the ground in Indonesia. So as we came together, they inspired me to start on a research. So my research was on perceptions of young Indonesians living in Jogja towards people with mental health issues. I could only have done that study, right, because of the support of these amazing people. That got me thinking systematically about looking at stigma and also looking at how cultures play a big part in influencing how we conceptualize mental health, how we approach mental health and mental wellness in Indonesia, where which I miss greatly, right? That's why I'm wearing this batik over here as well, correct? So in Indonesia, there's often talk about collectivistic cultures, and I think over there it could be both a protective factor as well as even at times some a stressor for some people. So there are always these nuances and cultural nuances in working with across different cultures, and I just thought to really want to put that out there that as we look towards looking and working across cultures, there must be these sensitivities that I remind myself to kind of build these competencies. And I'm no way there, but I think it's a start that I must always remember. And that's also the reason why I wanted to share this photo because this was really an awakening of the cultural ways of working that must be resonating with the people, which you stick with.
Well, let's put that photo to the side for a moment and just have a closing thought. My closing thought that I just want to share, you said that cultures can develop a stigma around mental health issues. The point is, no culture is static. Cultures are constantly evolving, developing, cultures are learning things from each other. The way that we look at mental health can change, and it changes thanks to a lot of hard work by all the people in that photo, by you having these kinds of conversations, changing policies, working with governments, working with leaders, working with academics. All of us have to work together so that the resources and the healthy perspectives on mental health problems evolve, develop in a very healthy way. That's my final thought for the audience. What's your final thought, Yifeng?
Wow, I think that's brilliant, Jason, and that really goes towards the Together from Mental Health um, team, right? That NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illnesses, was really looking at. I think that if I can just really have this final thought of sorts, um, I cannot help but think back a lot towards the 2021's theme of for the World Mental Health Day, right? Which was about move for mental health, invest in mental health resources, and that's something that I feel that is not something that just people on the ground can do on their own. It's something that requires all of us to come together to do that. It requires governments really to put in the resources. In Southeast Asia, if there's one thing I realize is that we might be sometimes the resourcing towards mental health may not be as high, right? Relatively, for example, to US, right, or across other places in more developed countries. But it doesn't mean that we have to be afraid of that. We can be resourceful, and at the same time as well, beyond just being resourceful, we must continue to push for more to make mental health a leadership priority, and that a conversation that is not just a conversation, but where we take action towards achieving mental wellness for all. So that's for me.
That is a fantastic message to end on. Oh, Yifeng, I wish we had another hour. I've enjoyed the conversation. It just flew by so fast, too fast. Wish I had some more time with you. But thank you so much for joining the audience and me today to share all your thoughts. Lots more to discuss on mental health. We could go for days. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Thanks so much. Take care. Till the next time.